Once you get your servos set, then you can go ahead and start applying your decals. And this is pretty tedious. There's a lot of small decals that go on this airplane. You got to look closely at the instructions as to where they go. I believe I ended up using that online or downloaded color instructions, because there's just a lot of small decals on here. Up behind the canopy, on the wing. So that takes a little bit. Probably one of the longest parts of the job of the assembly is installing all these decals. Some go there, up by the cowling. There's a lot of them. So needless to say, that's a little busy. I got lines on here. These are my balancing points for balancing the aircraft, because you always want to balance the airplane before you fly it. And some people balance it with the wheels extended, some with them retracted, and I believe I do mine retracted. I tried it both ways, but I do it mainly with them retracted in a flying configuration. I got a 32 here, and I got a manufacturer here. The manufacturer recommends this line. I don't remember the number. It's in the instructions as the distance in millimeters aft of where the wing meets the fuselage, right here. That measurement is a manufacturer's. Most people adjust their CG so it's right around the area of this hole. It's not a hole, it's a detent where the decal goes in. I have a 32 here, and that 32 is because my first battery was a 3200 milliampere 4-cell, and this is where it balanced best at, right here, with the battery as much forward as I dared go with it. This is where I got a balance on it. Now I ended up having to put some weight in the nose in order to get the balance this close. Otherwise it would have been way back. And I couldn't even come close, so I ended up putting about four quarter-ounce weights up in the nose. I'll show you where shortly. Alright, the final thing you're going to do on your airplane is you're going to build up your prop. What you get with the kit is you get the hub, this red. You get this red hub separate here. These 4 blades come separate. They're in a bag of 4. Some people get a 5th one. Depends on who you get the model from. I got 4. And you get a bag of screws and nuts. And you get the spinner. And the spinner has 2 screws that hold the spinner to the hub. So you get a spinner and 2 screws. You get a hub. You get 8 screws and 8 nuts and 4 blades, and you have to assemble them. Essentially what you do is you put on the back side, you insert the nut into the cutout for it right there. For each blade, there's 2 on each blade. Insert the nut in there. You can hold it in with your finger. Put the screw in. You lay your prop blade flat on the hub, on the front side of the hub. You can't mess it up because there's only one flat side of the prop blade. And it has 2 little, I don't know if you can see it, 2 little ridges. One in the front, one in the back that the prop blade rests between. It sets right flat in between those 2 ridge lines. With your finger on the back, and you screw in the first hole. You start to tighten the screw to get it started. So you get the nut seated in the hole. You do this, then you put the second one in. You can, if you want to, start them all. That way you have all your nuts in place and seated in the holes. And then you slowly snug them down. I alternate between the 2, snug a little bit, turn a little bit, turn a little bit until you get them snug. And you get them snug, and then one final tight little twitch snug on it. You don't want to overdo it because I'd be afraid of cracking the blade, but you do it enough so that when you when you hold with one hand the hub and the other hand, you should not be able to wiggle the prop back and forth. But before you get, you know, permanent with this, you're going to want to balance the prop, or at least check the balance. It is reasonable, and I know everybody says to check the balance. It's very reasonable to think that if you put it on right and everything's new, that it's not going to be so far out of balance that it's going to be a problem. Some people will argue that and say you absolutely have to do it. It could be a major problem. So it's a good thing to do. You should balance it with the spinner, because these are going to be your items up front that are dynamically turning, and a balance will affect them. Now you can balance this prop alone if you wanted to. You'd put it up on the blades like so, would sit. Now, as I said, on this particular deal, it's best to do the spinner and the prop together, because you cannot balance this spinner separately. There's no hole in the front. There's no way you could slide this on and hold it with the balancer. So you almost have to, not almost, you have to install the spinner. So what you would do in this case is, you're already locked in place with the prop. The prop is already on the balancing shaft to stay. Install the spinner with the two screws. You just screw them in place, and now your spinner is screwed on normally, the way it normally would be, to the hub. The whole assembly, you can balance this whole assembly, because you're not, if you look, you're still going to set the balancing shaft in there like so, and it will still sit on there just like that. Now you're balancing the whole assembly, the spinner and the prop together, and the hub, the props, and the spinner, all balanced together. And when you get it balanced, you want to take a marker, like a Sharpie, and make an index mark on the hub and the spinner together in a line. What that does is it marks the alignment of the spinner and the hub, because you can put that spinner on 180 degrees out, and if you've balanced it one way and you take the whole thing apart and you go to put it on the airplane, you get the spinner 180 degrees out, you could throw off the balance. So you take that mark and you put it on there, so that when you put the spinner back on later, you line up the two marks and you know the spinner is on in the same orientation as it was when you balanced it. How do you balance it? What if it's out of balance and you have one blade, it's always heavy and it's going to the bottom? People have different ways of doing it. Some guys use hot glue, and they put globs of glue at the hub of the blade, of the light blade, to try to bring it around. Some people will sand off a little bit of the heavy blade to try to equalize it. What I do is I go to the opposite end, the lighter end, opposite of the down blade, and I'll start applying strips of electrical tape. In this case I use red electrical tape. I can use any color, but you know, it's on a red hub, so I'm just kind of particular that way. So I'd put strips of red electrical tape on the light end, and then I put it back on the balancer, and hopefully I'll keep doing that until the heavy end no longer is the heavy end, and the prop will stay in whatever position you position it in, and let go. It should stay in there. It's not, there's no heavy end trying to pivot to the bottom. It's not always going to be one point where you apply all the tape. Sometimes you'll apply a little bit of tape at the light end and it will rotate a little bit, and then another area will be heavier. So I have here tape at that location, tape at that location, small piece at that location, and a piece at that location. It took all these different locations. It can be time consuming to get that prop on the balancer with the spinner, so that wherever I position that prop, it would stay in place. Installing the prop on this airplane is really very easy. In essence, you have On the back side of the hub, you have a hex head cutout that slides onto the prop motor shaft. Your prop motor on this P-51 is, the stock motor is a 4250 540 kV motor. That's what this is right here in my hand. So it's the same motor. And if you look, let me see if I can point it out to you. On the, you have the motor shaft flange, this big section right here, and just in front of it, there's a little hex headed form there, and that's what's going to slide into your prop hub. So what you're going to do is you're just going to slide, very simply, slide your prop hub onto the motor shaft on the airplane, like so. And you see that hex section? You'll slide right on when you line it up. That's good. And you have your shaft and threaded portion exposed. Then you're just going to put on the bullet nut. The cone nut will thread right onto the prop shaft. It has a hole through at the end where you can put maybe a punch or a small screwdriver if you want, and it will be used as leverage to tighten it down, the prop and hub, against the motor shaft. Okay, now that your prop is installed onto the shaft and you get your bullet nut tightened down, you're going to install the spinner. If you remember, we have the Sharpie mark on the hub for the balancing purposes. So you find the corresponding Sharpie mark on your spinner. So you install a spinner. I actually have two marks on this one. I'll find the one that lines up. Here's the one that lines up. Your Sharpie mark lines up. Perfect. Now your spinner is installed onto the hub in the same orientation as it was when you balanced it. You can go ahead and install your two screws for your spinner. And I suggest you get both started and you just incrementally tighten them until they tighten up snug. That will give you the best fit for the spinner. And now you're all set.